Hello and welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. This one into the Sagittarius new moon of the 23rd or 24th of November, depending on where you're located in the world. I'm going to give you an outline of how I'm going to structure this video. So first up, let's explore what Sagittarius new moon energy means. Really exciting. This is the sign of discovery, expansion, and because the ruler Jupiter is very much to do traditionally with good fortune, how does that feed in to this event? I'm also going to share with you exactly when it occurs in all the big cities of the world. Now, there's a fixed star on this particular Sagittarius new moon, which occurs at 1°37, and that is Corniforous. So I need to outline to you what that fixed star means and the impact it will have. Now, we can all relate to the heavens in terms of the overall zodiac, which begins with the spring equinox and the sign of Aries as house 1. So Sagittarius represents house 9. So I will share with you on the screen a simple birth chart wheel which shows how we can think of this event in terms of us all. But then I will share the event chart based on the exact time that this occurs on in terms of universal central time, which does have an ascendant in the sign of Leo, which is conjunct the fixed star Regulus, and it's also right on the anaretic degree, so right at the end of Leo. So really a lot of Virgo energy is going to be feeding into this event. Now, in terms of that more serious chart, also the gathering of the sun, the moon, and also Venus and Mercury, which are in a conjunction in Sagittarius, are all in house 4, which is very un-Sagittarius-like, much more to do with consolidation, protection, defense, security, home, nurture, emotion and family, where Sagittarius energy is really dramatic, expansive and adventurous. So we need to understand how to thread that together. Finally, I'm going to go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces, which you can watch in terms of your sun or your ascendant, or both if they're different. And that will give you a flavour of what you can expect over the next month. So please stay with me for all this exciting information. If you are new to my channel, I'd be honoured if you would subscribe. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. And if you've yet to get your year 2023 personal forecast based on your time, date and place of birth, if you order now, you can get the rest of this year, 2022, free. Plus, in my special package, your life roadmap, your character analysis, which can guide you and help you to understand some of the repetitive patterns that occurred in your life, but also how you can seize opportunities with greater conviction and confidence. And there's 30% off. Please see the link beneath this video. So first up, let's explore the exciting Sagittarius new moon. This is the 9th zodiac sign. It's governed by fire, which gives it passion and thrust and daring, adventurism. But of course, it's also mutable in terms of its quality, so very flexible. Basically, Sagittarius people really dislike life if it becomes too much of a routine process. It needs to keep bringing up opportunities to do different and fresh things that inform. Sagittarius people generally have a huge thirst for knowledge, travel, higher education, exploration of any kind. But if things can be spontaneous and sometimes a little bit challenging in a physical sense, so more rugged adventurism, getting out into the great outdoors, or perhaps in a more philosophical sense, the love of higher knowledge in terms of spirituality and the information that Sagittarius people absorb is quite extraordinary, to be honest. And Sagittarius people make great companions because they just have such a welter of knowledge that they're always absorbing. But Sagittarius people also like a degree of freedom and independence. So for all of us, what we can do is garner the energy of Sagittarius and try to take it into our lives to bring a bit more spontaneity, thrust and excitement into our existences over the next month as the influence of the new moon is really felt. Now, this particular Sagittarius new moon is also interesting because Mercury, a planet which is in traditional astrology said to be debilitated, is actually located in Sagittarius. But I actually feel that this is one of the weakest debilities of all, because Mercury loves information, and of course it's about talk and thought, and the sign of Sagittarius is about higher knowledge, whereas Mercury governs the sign of Gemini, which is about chit-chat, quick informational shares, so very much to do with microblogging, text messages, instant messaging, and the news cycle, whereas the ninth house is more about the meaning behind all those things. So Mercury here, allied with Venus, is a glittering combination, and the ninth house can be about publishing, it can be about data. So if you have something you want to share with a wider audience, whether it's digitally through a blog or a website or a product or service, or you have something you want to share that's much more deeply threaded into your very being, this is a marvelous opportunity to do so over the next 4 weeks, because Mercury along with Venus brings a greater sense of charm and ability to cultivate and impress the people that we share information with. So if you're someone who also loves travel, Sagittarius is the sign that governs international affairs, boundaries and borders. Now that's a controversial subject at the moment, because obviously we've seen Russia invade the country of Ukraine, and so Sagittarius energy in that sense has been a grab, which is not a positive thing, but the rule of law is also very Sagittarius. So the pushback is other collective energies coming together for the greater good to try to correct the injustice that's been manifested there. So it's going to be interesting what goes on with Ukraine particularly, but for a lot of people, especially with all the lockdowns and restriction on freedom that we had through the COVID outbreak, I think that where possible people are going to want to go off, whether it's within the locality that they live in, get out for a few days, walking in the country, get into the coast, or it could be for some other lucky people will want to jet off somewhere further afield. Experiencing new cultures, that's another thing that Sagittarius energy can be wonderful for. So if you do go to somewhere and you're lucky enough to get some sun, you may also want to take in some more historical factors on that expedition that really add balance to just having, the usual things we all like with good food, good wine and some sunshine, but also enjoying the more historical elements and artifacts of any particular area or city or place you may find yourself in. So really exciting stuff. Now I mentioned before that there is a fixed star that coincides with this particular event, and the reason for that is that the sign of Sagittarius, like all signs, is divided by 3 decans of 10 degrees. So each sign is 30 degrees. So the first decan of the sign of Sagittarius is governed by Jupiter, which is the ruler of this sign. But also, if we use the 12th harmonic approach in astrology, we divide each of those 30 degrees into 2.5 degrees, and the first 2.5 degrees of any zodiac sign gives us even more of a flavour of that sign. So because this event occurs at 1 degree 37 minutes, it's very Sagittarius. Now on the screen now you can see the exact time and date that it occurs in all the major cities of the world. Now I wanted to tell you about the fixed star, which is Corniphorus, which is at 1 degree and 5 minutes, and the event is at 1 degree 37, so pretty close. Now, this can give us a real sense of purpose and, a desire. So if we have the desire of the sign of Sagittarius, it's expanding our circumstances, being a bit more daring, freeing up our lives to make them more independently based where possible. So the desire to do that can be strong. Now on the screen now we have the simple birth chart wheel, which helps us to relate to this event collectively. So this is how we're all going to experience this, because the simple birth chart wheel is based on the Zodiac, with Aries being house 1. So you can see in Aries we have Chiron, happens to be in retrograde, but you can also see in house 9 we have the moon, the sun, Mercury, as I mentioned before, and Venus. So that's a real glittering lineup in the sign of Sagittarius. But the ruler of the sign of Sagittarius is Jupiter, and that's in retrograde, and you can see that's in house 12. Now it's very close to Neptune, and these two planets govern the sign of Pisces. They actually came together in an exact conjunction on the 12th of April 2022. And some astrological pundits saw this as being a very symbolic event in terms of spirituality. Now, I wouldn't disagree with that, but I think what was important at that juncture was to see what else was going on in the heavens that informed that particular conjunction. So if we look at that conjunction in isolation, we don't get the big picture. And Sagittarius energy is about the big picture par excellence. So Jupiter retrograde, I don't think is so good for Sagittarius. And also it's squaring the position of the sun and the moon in the sign of Sagittarius. So in terms of us all collectively, that's a 9th house, 12th house square. And that particular square will amplify sensitivities, particularly because Jupiter and Neptune are so close together, both in retrograde in the sign of Pisces. So I think what you can expect to see over the next month is a lot of information come out into the open to do with what's been hidden. So whether it's to do with corruption, whether it's to do with sexual impropriety by people in positions of influence, whether it's to do with the way that secret slush funds and money have been used to influence, for example, elections, or the running of governments, or to do with the running of corporations, or it's just celebrity affairs. So secrets can be revealed over the next month because the sign of Sagittarius has a thirst for truth. If you've ever had a bar conversation with a Sagittarius and you've got your facts wrong, they will tell you in a very blunt but not particularly unfriendly way that you are completely wrong. So that's one of the very positive things about Sagittarius people. Now, if you've experienced the Sagittarius in a more personal context, when they're letting you know that they think you've got some information wrong, it may be quite hard to take. But I think the truth-loving vibe of Sagittarius is really potentially being compromised by Jupiter and Neptune on this event. So just be aware that there can be some distortion around the sharing of ideals, belief systems, and information over the next month. And in our own personal situations, just be aware that we could feel things much more intensely. So whereas we might normally turn the other cheek, something could really get under our skin and could see us reacting in a much more vulnerable and obvious way than perhaps usually would be so. Now, the other big takeouts, I feel, is that in the second decan of the sign of Sagittarius is governed by Mars, and you can see that Mars in the third house of the overall chart is in retrograde, but it's squaring up with Neptune, and that third 12th house energy just adds to the swirling mist of misinformation, gossip, and potentially backbiting that could go on. Also, Saturn and Uranus, which have been in an attritional right angle for near to 2 years. That's coming to an end at the start of December, so we're nearly out of the woods in terms of within 3 degrees, which I feel has the most powerful impact, but they are still in a square on this event, so we're all still coming to terms collectively with the increase, the explosion in the increase of commodities, basic fuel, and obviously food distribution, which is governed by the sign of Taurus. Very unpredictable in terms of that. And Mars, which being in the 3rd house can be very much to do with transport, suggests that the movement of goods over the next month could definitely be disrupted, and it could be disrupted by things that perhaps are to do with sea transport, to do with container ports, very much more likely to be to do with industrial action as well, because the injustices that people are experiencing or feeling are going to be amplified by this Sagittarius event. So that gives you a flavour in terms of the simple birth chart wheel. So on the screen now we have the event chart based on Universal Central Time. Now, as I always say, if you follow other astrologers in your locality who may be based away from Universal Central Time, they may get a different ascendant. But the reason I like Universal Central Time is not because I'm based in Great Britain myself, it's because it's something we can all relate to. You can see that the ascendant for this event is conjunct the fixed star Regulus. So that adds quite a lot of pride. And also the part of fortune is right on the 1st house, so that's rather useful. But it is the anaretic degree, so in astrology that's particularly important. It's where we can struggle with integration. So although it's Leo and the part of fortune is Leo, so that gives us, or this energy, a potential luminousness, a potential grand presence. Actually the overlay, all but 7 minutes, is going to be in Virgo. So Virgo is very much to do with welfare, purity, the orderly structure of our existences, living our lives with a degree of virtue which balances the more expansive and the more desirous-led energies of Sagittarius. Now the interesting thing, therefore, is the ascendant is squaring up with the event. So we have Jupiter in a square with the Sun and the Moon, but we also have the ascendant on this event in a square with the Sun and the Moon too. What does that mean? I think it means that anything to do with security, our personal, emotional security, where we're wanting to defend ourselves, which is usually our home, but of course our home can be in our bodies, our souls, our emotions. So this is going to be a very emotional new moon, considering it is in the fiery and go-getting and expansive Sagittarius. And you can see in terms of the more serious astrology that Venus and Mercury, they're all in the 4th house. Now Venus in the 4th house is wonderful for perhaps adopting some new, fresh colour schemes and decorating approaches, anything to do with soft furnishings, because we want to achieve comfort with Venus in the 4th house. But we also want space and freedom because it's Sagittarius. But having Mercury close by suggests that if you are someone who's thinking of starting a new enterprise based from home, which offers services in your locality, this could actually turn out to be an excellent new moon for you. It could also be a time that if you remodel your home space to create the right balance between the domestic needs of your situation and giving you somewhere that you can do your work and be more commercial, work from home, then that also can really be blessed by this particular combination between Venus and Mercury. But that square between the ascendant and the new moon suggests to me that we could be struggling a little bit to get the right balance between what we need to do in terms of practicalities, the Virgoan energy of the overlay, with what we want to do in terms of freedom, but also to be protective. So there's a bit of a conflict going on there. Now, the other takeout in this particular more technical wheel is that Jupiter, which squares up the Sun and the Moon, is in house 8. So we've got house 4 in a square with house 8. And this is where Placidus is perhaps more difficult to follow than equal house astrology. But the house 8 position of Jupiter in its retrograde is very much about financial markets. You know, we're talking about anything to do with insurances, pensions, savings, property, mortgages. That is possibly going to be aggravated. So I feel that there's going to be a greater sense of uncertainty and concern being manifested collectively around the security of our homes. So unfortunate but true. You can also see that Uranus is right there up on the 10th house cusp. It's not quite there, but if I was reading a person's nativity, I definitely feel that that person had quite a changeable approach to life and needed lots of fresh new experiences. But because it's Taurus and the 10th house is very much to do with how we connect to the wider world, that suggests instability in the wider world, sudden events which are quite challenging. We also have Mars in its retrograde in the 10th house, which is very much to do with our connection to the world at large, in its retrograde, squaring with Neptune, but also in a quincunx with Pluto. So Pluto in the 5th house, in a 150 angle with Mars in the 10th. I think that our desire for joy, which can definitely come through the sign of Sagittarius, is really being qualified here by this white noise of different informational sources that really come in on our senses. So I feel that Pluto and Mars is very much about power battles, and it can be to do with the use of resources, defense resources, in a destructive way, which obviously is concerning when we think of what's going on in Ukraine. Saturn's in the 6th house, which is interesting because that's saying that when it comes to our health, fitness and diet, purifying things, working collectively, you know, recycling things, working within our communities the best we can to use resources efficiently would be a good thing to do. But of course the 6th, 9th energy with Uranus means that we can feel constrained. Part of us wants to do what we want to do, the other part of us wants to be free, which of course is a very Sagittarian virtue, but somehow or another there has to be some trades. So I think in a nutshell, this event from a more technical viewpoint is asking us to be very mindful of security, but also of protecting ourselves, not blowing things out of proportion where we possibly can, and just being aware that information can be very unsettling. But if we can create a sense of variety, freshen things up at home, move the furniture around, declutter, those would be ways that we could work well with the technical influence of the event chart. Now, please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces. Now, for you, Aries, having that collective of energy, the Sun, the Moon, Venus and Mercury, all in the 9th house, really is going to push you to do something a little bit different over the next 3 or 4 weeks. Now, whether it's where you've tended to source Christmas presents from, you know, maybe you're going to be a bit more enterprising in your approach, maybe you're going to want to travel somewhere on a bit of a Christmas expedition, maybe you're going to want to get away from it all. But that energy in your 12th house is something to be very mindful of. People around you at the moment, you have a reputation of being a go-getter, you're a fire sign, you initiate things, you listen to your instincts. There's something very dramatic about your approach that I absolutely love. But I think at the moment, what is really important for you particularly is to filter the information or the energies that you're receiving from other people, because they're going to be heightened so much. So if you're traveling somewhere or going out for an evening of social interaction, you're just going to soak it all up in a much more vivid way. So think of the ways in which you can just put some defences in to make sure that some of the energies that are going to be heading in your direction are not going to disable you in some way, because they get into you in a way which is a little bit uncharacteristic. So I feel that your sensitivity is going to be enormously high, but also you're going to have an innate desire for the truth in all sorts of parts of your life, whether it is your work, whether it is your romantic situation, whether it is your family situation. Being quite single-minded about sticking with what you feel is your truth and your reality is the secret to making the most of this Sagittarius new moon. Now for you, Taurus, the collective, including your ruler Venus in the 8th house, could be very exciting if there is somebody around you that's proven to be very mesmeric and very interesting and intriguing from a romantic viewpoint. But of course the 8th house also can be a time of transitions. So is something making way in your life? And because you have Mars in retrograde in house 2, everyday finance, and you have the Sun and the Moon, Venus and Mercury in house 8, longer term finances, and Neptune afflicts Mars, but Jupiter afflicts the new moon, and they're in your sector of the future, but also your idealism. The next month is definitely not a time to put anyone on a pedestal, whether it's a potential partner, a friendship, or a business idea. So get it all down to brass tacks and be determined to work through a check by check system if you are thinking very carefully about your financial situation and moving your resources around. You need to have really solid information, and I think some of the information that we're all going to receive over the next month is, to put it lightly, going to be foggy, distorting, and not necessarily correct. So be very determined to get information very clear. Now for you, Gemini, this collective occurs, including your ruler, in your 7th house. Mercury in the 7th house can be super in a way because it brings a greater sense of detachment to how we relate. So therefore, if people see things differently, we're less offended by it. Now that's something that air signs have a degree of capability for, not exclusively or all the time, but sometimes you can say to an air sign like yourself, look, I see things differently, and you accept it because you see that other people have a right to a different viewpoint to you. At other times, you might take it personally. But Mercury generally can be very helpful here. So I feel that if you're wanting something important to develop around a romantic or relationship situation, actually the prospects are very good over the next month, as long as you can deal with the fact that Mars, being in retrograde in your sign, is being afflicted by Neptune, which for you means how you feel information, how it comes into you. So for example, work-based information could be quite hazy, and then because Jupiter in your 10th house, which can be actually quite good for you through to the 22nd of December, in terms of particularly when the retrograde ends, which of course is just about to happen. So once Jupiter goes forwards, it gives you a window of opportunity to improve your professional standing over the next month. But I think at this juncture, on this event, because it does square up the new moon, I think just be aware around professional relationships particularly, that whatever is being promised or spoken of actually is going to stack up. Also be aware in more personal relating situations that your philosophies could be very important to how you view the potential in a relationship. But I wouldn't choke something off too quickly because somebody sees something very differently to you. Use the detachment of Mercury in your 7th house, because there could be ways that you can start to move into this situation, if it emerges, that actually can be very beneficial to you. And again, your ability to flex into situations very differently can be such an asset for you. Now, Cancer, for you, the collective in the sign of Sagittarius is very much about organisation, work, precision, virtue. Now, you're a great manager of situations for sure, and whether it's resources or an organisation or a unit within a business, Cancer people often play a leading role. So good stuff. It's just that having Jupiter and Neptune in your 9th house wants you to be very free when the new moon's asking you to be very disciplined in terms of where you commit yourself. Having Mars in the 12th house is also proving to be really tricky. So you've had the Mars square Neptune amplification that this event talks of. You've had that going on for the last month or so, since the start of October. So I feel that there's going to be a bit more of what you've been experiencing. So your feelings can still be very tender, and I think what you should be looking to do with this new moon is to try to shore up anything to do with diet, nutrition, exercise. Really fortify those areas with as greater clarity as possible. Now, Leo, of course, in terms of the event chart, the ascendant is just snuck into your sign, conjunct Regulus, lovely. But it means the gathering of energy in the 5th house is very passionate, it's very demonstrative, it's very playful. So you could be in for a good time over the next month. What I would suggest, however, is that you make sure that you can afford anything that you're embracing, you know, whether it's your generosity for Christmas presents or you're thinking about something more speculative. That's the area that I think needs much more caution. But certainly you can dazzle people over the next 4 weeks with your charisma. I think apart from Sagittarius, but even including Sagittarius, I think that this particular event works probably as good for you as anyone. Obviously, Saturn is still in your 7th house. It is still in a clash with Uranus. It could still be uncertainty around your work or work relationships. But if you're wanting to embrace the pre-Christmas social whirl, you can do it with aplomb. Which brings us to Virgo. Now, in terms of the event chart, very Virgoian with that mainly 1st house ascendant in your sign, all but a couple of minutes. And it means, therefore, that the gathering of the Sagittarian energy is all in your 4th house. So your energy for this event is very similar to the event chart. How does it work out for you? Well, if you're wanting to make some last moment improvements to receive guests over the Christmas period, you're likely to be very enterprising about the way you go about it. But there could also be some distorted stuff going on about who does what, who turns up when, who's going to contribute what. The usual stuff that blights most families at Christmas could be quite strong for you this year. However, Mars is still in a very commanding position for you despite its retrograde. And I think that's saying to you, don't try to steer situations in too much of a forceful way. You know, even if people frustrate you, just be aware that generally your sensitivities could be quite strong at the moment, but also this could be a wonderful time for you to have some magical moments, being in a quiet or secluded location or spending time just pottering around at home, making homemade soups and home-cooked food, sitting by a roaring log fire. All that kind of stuff could really call out to you in such a lovely way. It's just that Neptune and Jupiter have a big impact on you, particularly because they're in your sector of relating. So you need to be sure that the reality of what's being related actually stacks up. So Libra, this event occurs in house 3 for you, which is about communication. Of course, it's more Gemini-like. But having Mercury, the ruler of Gemini, in house 3, conjunct your ruler Venus, means that someone's going to be hanging on your every word over the next 4 weeks. Now, you're probably thinking, what's new? Absolutely. So an even more enhanced magical way of expressing yourself over the next 4 weeks, which is really delightful. What's not to like? Well, Saturn is in your 5th house, of course, which is about romance and self-expression, squared up with Uranus in your 8th house of devotion, shared financial resources. So I think it's important really to be sincere. You know, that sounds like an odd thing to say, and I'm not saying that you would be insincere, but we all say things in a quick, reactive way, not because we're being flippant, but maybe because we feel the circumstances demand, not a massive investment. So someone might say to us, for example, "How are you?" And we'll say, "I'm absolutely fine," when, you're not. So that kind of situation, I feel that especially around conversations with neighbours or siblings, if somebody does inquire how you are, take the opportunity to use, the delicacy and diplomacy, which is so much part of you, to present how you feel, but do say how you feel. Don't be fearful of saying exactly what is going on. Now, of course, Mars is in the 9th house in retrograde, which is very Sagittarius. It's about exploration and discovery and adventure. So that's an interesting paradox. So for you, it's the energy in house 6 that hits house 3 and house 9. And so house 6 is where we need to be sacrificing. It's where you could be asked to help out a colleague, covering some shifts, perhaps invest in a little bit more sacrifice in your situation. But I think for you, what you're really wanting over the next month is bubbly interchanges and a bit of flirting and stimulation, and why not? So if you have a lovely opportunity to go out and enjoy some time, mix and mingle, take it. But as I say, if people inquire about you, have the confidence to actually say how it really feels. But I think when it comes to your physical vitality, I just wouldn't overwhelm yourself with too many demands. I wouldn't even read too much. And especially when it comes to social media and the news in the world, I think that could be more impactful on your senses than some of the zodiac signs. So you may just want to defend yourself from some of the, really tough stuff that's going on out in the world that we get to read. But generally, the way you express yourself can just have an added elan and magic, and that could draw someone to you in a way which can be very good professionally or even perhaps personally. So Scorpio, the wonderful thing about this eclipse is it can actually have a really beneficial impact on your finances. Now, I don't say that lightly because obviously we're all facing significant headwinds, but if anyone can see the loot show an uptick in the next month, it's you. So that's really exciting. What's the trick? Well, I think it's to understand Jupiter and Neptune's impact on those planets that are in Sagittarius, but also on your traditional ruler Mars in retrograde. And they kind of potentially can distort things by just seeing you splash out money that comes in rather quickly and rather impetuously. I try to avoid that. Also, if you're really drawn to someone in a more sensual, sexual way, again, get to know them a little bit more before perhaps, exposing yourself. I'm not sure that's the right pun, but opening yourself up in terms of your deeper self. But certainly in terms of enjoying the good things in life and perhaps having some surprising strokes of fortune financially, the next month can be really hopeful for you. Sagittarius, the new moon for you, how wonderful. It is about giving yourself some kind of glamorous makeover. It's about believing in your presentation, whether you want to give yourself a trim or buy some new clothes or reimagine something in your situation in a fresh way. You have a real wonderful opportunity to do that. What would stop you? Well, just self-doubt, particularly around your emotional situation with Neptune and Jupiter in your 4th house. Are there emotional strands that are impacting on how you feel about yourself in terms of your individuality, your persona? Your persona is given a wonderful opportunity to glow, but Neptune and Jupiter, and obviously Jupiter being your ruler, will undermine you if you let them. So a clarity of purpose is important. Self-belief in terms of your emotional fabric. And when it comes to Saturn and Uranus, just know that the stress that's been so manifest over the last couple of years is coming very soon to a much a much less fractious point in terms of the astrology. Now Capricorn, the collection of energy in Sagittarius is in your 12th house, and it could see you thinking very nostalgically about people from your past, or is it one person? This could be family members who've passed. It could even be an ex that comes into your thinking. It may be someone that you haven't really thought that you had a particular resonance or depth of relationship to. You're going to go on a bit of a crash course over the next month in terms of your deeper emotions, things that you didn't really feel or know were particularly important. Your shadow side could manifest themselves much more potently. Also, people could be blunter with you, Sagittarius, about some of the sides of your nature that you don't necessarily see, that they may feel are not as integrated as they could be. And that can actually be a painful process. So there could be some conversations that come up in the next month which you find tricky. The 12th house new moon is always the hardest new moon in terms of solar astrology, and it's your turn for that. Of course, you do have Pluto in your sign in a quincunx with Mars, which happens to be exalted in your sign, and that first 6th house energy again puts a conflict between what you want for you and what others feel you should be doing for them. So you could be pushed to be quite sacrificing in the next 4 weeks, make allowances for other people, put your individual needs first, and some stuff that has been hidden or disguised from you could be presented to you in a way that could be challenging, but at least it will give you a lot more understanding of how people view you, even if it's not how you view yourself. Which brings us to Aquarius. Now, the signs of Aquarius and Sagittarius have a commonality, and that commonality is a love of freedom and space. So having this collective in the sign of Sagittarius, including Mercury, which is exalted in the sign of Aquarius, pardon me, and also rules the second decan of Aquarius, is very good for sociability over the next month, and also for forging new contacts or networking, or your past connection to others, which has been something that's very important to you, can come back to you in a very positive way. Now, because Jupiter is in the 2nd house and about to go direct, that can be very good for your finances between now and the 22nd of December, when Jupiter moves back to Aries. But on this event, I think it's basically saying, don't be too idealistic when it comes to any kind of discussion over resources, a contract, property or mortgage matters. You really need to think about things when things would be a little more challenging, rather than the peak of your situation or earnings. Which brings us to Pisces. Your star is going to be in the ascendant over the next month. People are going to want to gravitate towards you, promote your successes, celebrate your talents, give you a much higher profile and platform. This is wonderful stuff. Also, you've got your two rulers together. Okay, they may be forging discordant angles to Mars in the case of Jupiter, and Neptune in the case of Mars, and Jupiter in the case of the new moon. But that gives you an opportunity to big yourself up. It's just, if we big ourselves up, we need to understand that that could be examined further down the line. So important to be sincere. Saturn does continue in the 12th house though, which has been really tough. Once it moves into your sign next March the 7th, I feel if you're early born Pisces, you may feel a bit of a limitation in terms of your physical energy, but it's going to be much better than being through the 12th house, believe me. But the square with Uranus suggests that some energy, some electric energy, your nervous system is still a bit stressed out, I feel. So if you are applying for a job, trying to raise your profile, do a presentation, meet influential people, make sure you don't over egg the pudding, because it could have an impact on your vitality and ability to function in a well-balanced way. So that concludes each of the 12 zodiac signs. Thank you so much for joining me. Wishing you a very happy Sagittarius new moon.